Welcome back, infrastructure admins, to this detailed exam prep explainer. Today, we're building your mentor's blueprint to absolutely master Objective 13.2 for the Nutanix NCP-MCI 7.5 certification. If you're gearing up for this exam, which assumes a baseline of Acropolis Operating System, or AOS 7.5, and Acropolis Hypervisor, or AHV 11.0, you absolutely have to have a rock-solid grasp of disaster recovery architecture. And specifically, we're zeroing in on configuring and managing remote sites. We are not going to rush today. We're going to take a nice, methodical pace through this subtopic so that by the time we're done, you're practically bulletproof for exam day. All right, let's jump right in. Here is our quick roadmap for crushing Objective 13.2. We'll start by looking at why remote sites actually matter, walk through some concrete configuration examples, point out those sneaky exam traps you need to dodge, and then wrap up with the essential facts you just have to memorize. So, kicking things off with Section 1, why remote sites matter, and really establishing that foundational value in your overall strategy. Before we even think about clicking around in the user interface, we need to anchor ourselves in the real-world utility of remote sites. Think of a remote site as your ultimate safety net. In the Nutanix ecosystem, it's formally defined as the replication target location that stores data replications for your protected entities. Basically, whenever you set up a protection domain, which you'll often hear referred to as a PD, that PD desperately needs a destination to send its backup data to. That destination, that is your remote site. This could literally be another physical cluster sitting in a secondary data center halfway across the country, or it could even be a cluster hosted in a public cloud. For the exam, you need to fundamentally understand that the remote site is the definitive destination in your replication architecture. So how exactly does this fit into the timing of your backups? Well, when we talk about disaster recovery, or DR, remote sites are absolutely vital for asynchronous replication strategies. Asynchronous DR is engineered to protect your entities both locally and remotely with a recovery point objective, or RPO, of 1 hour or greater. Just as a super quick refresher, your RPO dictates how much data you can actually afford to lose, measured in time. So an RPO of 1 hour means you're taking and replicating snapshots at least every single hour to that remote site. Understanding this 1 hour or greater threshold for asynchronous DR is a massive contextual clue for the exam, especially when they try to trip you up with different protection schedules. Moving right along to Section 2, let's roll up our sleeves, do a walkthrough, and look at some concrete examples to understand the why behind the configuration. The NCP-MCI exam doesn't just test high-level theory, it really tests your practical, hands-on administrative knowledge. So they're going to expect you to know this exact workflow. Step 1, you navigate straight to the data protection dashboard in Prism element. Step 2, you click the remote site button. Step 3, you select physical cluster right from the pull-down list. And finally, Step 4, you provide the necessary inputs, like the remote cluster's virtual IP, into the dialog box and click Save. You really need to be able to visualize these steps blindly, because multiple choice questions love to shuffle this exact order just to see if you actually know where to initiate the setup. This visual beautifully illustrates exactly where you're going to be operating. Notice that, for protection domain-based disaster recovery, the remote site configuration is initiated directly from the data protection dashboard. It is not buried somewhere in the main hardware settings, and it's not hiding in the network settings. It lives strictly within that data protection umbrella. Whenever a test question asks you about initiating a replication target setup, your mind should immediately jump right to the data protection dashboard. Now let's look at a slightly more complex scenario and see how this plays out in real-world administration. Comparing a standard physical cluster to a single node replication target is absolutely crucial here. Why? Because the workflow actually changes. In a standard physical cluster setup, once your remote site is configured, your PD replications just flow seamlessly directly over to it. Simple, right? But if your remote site is a single node target cluster, say it's something you deployed in a tiny branch office to save on costs, there is an extra mandatory step. For a single node target, you must manually create a protection domain on that single node with the exact same name as the one on your primary cluster. If you forget to create this identically named PD on the receiving end, there's no way you'll be able to retrieve and restore those remote snapshots. Trust me, the exam loves to test this specific little nuance. That leads us right into the concept of vStore mappings, which is a huge why you need to understand for the exam. When you configure a remote site, Nutanix highly recommends configuring vStore mappings to make sure your replications actually land in the appropriate storage containers on the remote site. If you skip this, and a container with the exact same name doesn't already exist on that remote site, your data doesn't just evaporate. Instead, the system tries to be a little too helpful, and your replication might just default to a random user-created container or some default Nutanix managed container. Just imagine the sheer panic of trying to locate mission-critical database backups during a real live outage, all because they landed in some random default container. Understanding this mapping is what prevents that exact disaster. All right, let's pivot to Section 3. This is critical for anyone taking the test: exam traps and edge cases. I want you to pause for a second and just burn this exact documentation warning into your memory. Do not create multiple remote sites pointing to a single destination cluster. Otherwise, an alert is generated. The exam is very likely to throw a scenario at you where a hypothetical admin wants to increase bandwidth or maybe separate traffic by creating 3 different remote site definitions that all point to the exact same physical cluster IP. You have to know that this is an invalid configuration in AOS. It will definitely generate an alert, and it's a guaranteed trap designed to see if you truly understand the strict one-to-one relationship required when defining a remote target in the UI. Now, what's a Nutanix exam without some troubleshooting? You have to be prepared to decipher alerts. Let's take these slowly. If you see Alert 130372, which is titled Missing Network Segmentation, the underlying cause is almost always that the local site configuration is missing on the remote site's end. Basically, one side of the conversation is deaf. Now, if you get Alert 130375, Remote Config Fetch Failed, that's telling you the remote site is completely unavailable or there's a broad network connectivity issue. You troubleshoot that by checking your basic network pipes between the sites. Take your time to really digest these numbers. Knowing exactly what triggers these alerts lets you instantly eliminate wrong answers on multiple choice troubleshooting questions. And that missing network segmentation alert brings us to another massive pitfall. Remote site configuration is absolutely a two-way street. Your local cluster must also be configured as a remote site on the remote cluster for it to function as a valid target for data replication. Think of it like a mutual handshake. Cluster A says, hey, I'm sending my data to Cluster B. But for this to actually work properly for failover and recovery down the line, Cluster B has to be configured to say, I acknowledge Cluster A, and I know exactly how to talk back to it. If you only configure it in one direction, your DR strategy is essentially broken. Always remember, bidirectional awareness is mandatory. Okay, we're in the home stretch. Section 4, key facts to memorize. Let's lock in those essentials. Let's bring everything together. When you are actually managing these configurations in the user interface, remember this highly specific listing behavior parameter. The display can be configured to a maximum of 10 rows per page for this focus area. I know, it's a tiny UI detail, but these are exactly the kinds of administrative trivia questions that can totally trip up even a veteran engineer if they aren't paying close attention to the interface parameters. Now go ahead and take a mental screenshot of these 4 golden rules. Number 1. Remote sites are strictly the destination for your protection domain replication. Number 2, never ever appoint multiple remote site definitions to a single destination cluster, or you're going to trigger an alert. Number 3, always map your vStores, whether you're running near-sync or async DR, so you keep total control over where your data actually lands. And number 4, remote site awareness must always be bidirectional. That handshake has to go both ways. If you can confidently explain these 4 points to someone else, you are in phenomenal shape for Objective 13.2. I want to leave you with one final question to test your gut instinct and make sure you really grasp the why before you take this exam. Think about this scenario. If a vStore mapping isn't configured and a container with the exact same name doesn't exist on your remote site, where does your replication actually end up? If you know the answer to that, then you truly understand the real-world stakes of remote site configuration. This exam is testing your ability to prevent chaos just as much as it's testing your ability to click the right buttons. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep up the studying, trust your preparation, and go totally ace that exam.